Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast, a preview edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with me. We're coming to you on Friday morning as we get ready to preview number 4 Georgia hosting Austin Peay. That will be at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff on Saturday. That will be on ESPN Plus, SEC Network Plus. This is one of those games that Georgia plays where we do not have a beat writer for the Governors. So Ben and I are going to kind of take turns talking about Austin Peay, talking about what we're watching for and what we think we'll see when Georgia returns between the hedges on Saturday. So went through and watched the majority of Austin Peay's 34-14 victory over MTSU. Really impressive win on the road, and that is a rivalry that goes back quite a while. Pretty dominant performance. Kind of just wanted to talk about who stood out, how Austin Peay made this happen, and maybe, how that translates what we could watch for from Austin Peay on Saturday. Got to start at the top. I thought the most impressive player for Austin Peay in this game was Chris Parson, who people listening might recognize that name. He was at Mississippi State at one point. He's a quarterback. He was really impressive in the game against MTSU. Good improviser. There was a few times where he kind of had to scramble out of the pocket, keep plays alive. Was doing a good job throwing deep. Hit a great deep shot to set up Austin Peay's second touchdown in that game. I thought you could kind of see his veteran presence in watching, him handle blitzes and knowing when to bail out, knowing when to stay in the pocket. And he winds up getting banged up, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the episode. And Austin Smith, who was Austin Peay's starting quarterback last year, comes in relief. He was okay, but it was very clear to me between the two quarterbacks, Chris Parson is the better quarterback, much stronger arm, and a lot of good decision-making when he was in the game. Looking at the way Austin Peay won that game, and starting with the offense, I was really impressed with what they do on offense. Again, understanding that facing MTSU on the road and facing Georgia on the road, it's going to be two very different tasks. A lot of pre-snap motion for Austin Peay. Did a good job of working in RPO, and especially in the red zone. They made some really creative RPO calls that paid off. And that was a game, looking at the stats, and I mentioned some of the stats in our last episode, didn't know exactly how that game played out. Austin Peay jumped on them early. They got a 21-0 lead. MTSU is able to score before the half, tries to make things interesting, but couldn't do a ton with it. And, impressive win for Austin Peay. A lot to be excited about when you consider starting your season like that, especially with that being a rivalry. But watching the game back, Ben, to me it said a lot more about MTSU, which I do hate because Derek Mason is the coach, and I'm a big fan of Derek Mason. Got to cover him for a year when he was Auburn's defensive coordinator, but MTSU's offense was a train wreck. They couldn't get anything going. There was a couple different fourth downs that they went for right around midfield, and one quarterback very inaccurate pass, and then when they went back later on another fourth down, pretty much just threw the ball away, which, I guess he was trying to avoid throwing a pick and making a bad situation worse. The biggest thing that struck me looking at the numbers, MTSU, what made Austin Peay so impressive and how dominant their defense was, they made MTSU play from behind the sticks. I was looking at the numbers on third down. Ben, you want to take a guess? MTSU's average yardage needed to convert on third down in this game?
Well, I know they were 0 for 12 on third down, so I'm guessing that it was somewhere in the 8 to 9 range.
It was 10 flat.
Wow.
Just bad. They, looking at the numbers, 7 of their 12 third down attempts required at least 9 yards. They were 1 of 9 passing for all of 6 yards. And the thing that was really interesting comparing the two offenses in that game, Austin Peay wasn't much better. They needed 8.8 yards, but they actually converted a decent bit. 7 of 16 when you're almost needing 9 yards at third down. Those are pretty good numbers, but I think MTSU's in a bad way right now, especially on offense. I thought the defense did okay. Again, Chris Parson did a really good job of slicing and dicing when he was in the game. Thought that he had a good game, and this is a nice win for Austin Peay before they have to go between the hedges where things are not going to be quite as easy. Looking at some of the guys, I figured it would be a good idea to just run through some names that stuck out to me, both statistically and what I got to see in that game. Chris Parson, to me, I thought he looked like Austin Peay's best player. Did a very good job. I think you could kind of see he's a guy that's been around. He's a guy that's been a part of an SEC team in the past. I thought that he showed good poise, and I was really impressed with his arm. I mean, whether it was airing it out, he hit a deep post early in this game, or even just, little curls and hitting them right at the right time. I really like what Chris Parson had to offer, and I think when you consider where Austin Peay is and the competition level, I think he can have a very productive year. Looking elsewhere on offense, Shamar Kirk, he was the leading receiver against MTSU. Nate Garnett Jr. Had a very good game as well, one of the wide receivers. Looking at the running backs, I really like Corey Richardson, who is a Fayetteville, Georgia native, so I had to shout out that. Thought he showed good burst when he got the ball, and they did a decent job running the ball. I thought the passing game was a little bit more impressive when you look at the offensive play in that game. Javius Bond, who's actually listed as a DB, he was one of the leading rushers. I thought he looked pretty good as well. Defense. Ben, I didn't realize this was this guy's name until I was looking through the stats. One of the best names in college football, Ellis Jr. 6 tackles, 3 pass breakups, 0.5 tackles for a loss. I mean, Ellis Jr., a name so nice that they used it twice. But a couple other guys, Marcus Howard, he had half a sack. He made a play early in that game that I kind of thought was big, and MTSU kind of trying to play from behind, and Austin Peay kind of getting some early momentum. TJ Cox Jr., 2 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 1.5 tackles for loss. So, Ben, what's just your overall read of this Austin Peay team? Again, to me, it was one thing to beat MTSU in Murfreesboro, kind of get that rivalry, getting a heads up in that rivalry. But they beat them by 20. And I mean, really, I thought by the end of the third quarter, it was pretty clear that Austin Peay had that one under control.
All I can really go off of is, rewatching that first game against Middle Tennessee, checking out the box score. I'm not going to sit here and act like I have a ton of knowledge about Austin Peay's personnel outside of Ellis Jr., of course. Hopefully Ellis Sr. will be in the building to be able to watch that one as well. I think a lot of what happened in that game has a lot to do with Middle Tennessee. I don't know if this was confirmed or if this is out there or finalized, but I know there were rumors that Middle Tennessee was going down to one jersey color for the entire season, and they were just rocking one jersey. And I think that tells you a lot about where that program likely is from a financial standpoint and a point in time when being in the right financial standpoint is everything for putting a roster together. So I do believe Middle Tennessee is in a bad way right now. I think if you need evidence for how bad of a way that they're in, they just played Austin Peay at home and had 153 total yards, rushed for 44 yards, 2.9 yards per carry. And like Jordan said earlier, went 0 for 12 on third down. I think you've got to be a really bad football team to do something like that against Austin Peay. That's no disrespect to Austin Peay. With all due respect, Jordan, that's no disrespect to Austin Peay. If you are playing a team with the level of talent that Austin Peay can only hope to have, and you only have 44 yards rushing, you've got a lot of problems. Now, is there some credit to be given to Austin Peay? Do I think that Kirby Smart is probably licking his chops that he can go to film from a week ago of Austin Peay's and say, you think you're going to run the football? Well, this team just gave up less than 3 yards per carry last week against a team that rushed the ball more than 20 times. I think my stats are right on that, but I could be wrong on that. But either way, I think that you've got to expect Georgia to just outclass Austin Peay in this one. And like I said earlier in the week, to me, this game is all about how many freshmen you're able to rotate into the rotation.
Did want to shout out Austin Peay head coach Jeff Ferris. I believe they went 4-8 last season. He played at Duke in the late 2000s. He was a Duke assistant for a while. Was at UCLA before he came to Austin Peay. Ben, he is 35 years old, and man, that makes me feel like I haven't quite accomplished a lot because they had a rough first season, but to me, it does seem like they're trending in the right direction going into his second year.
Yeah, completely agree. And I had just a correction from the stats that I threw out. It was 2 flat yards per carry, 2.9 yards per pass. So they really weren't able to do anything offensively. But I know that Georgia is going to want to establish the run in a game against a team that only allowed 2 yards per carry. I know that Kirby Smart's going to use it as an opportunity for them to prove it in the running game.
So let's talk about what we want to see from the Georgia perspective. And we got into this a little bit on our episode earlier this week, but Ben, let's start with like a position group. Who's a position group you want to see show out? Which position group for Georgia are you looking to have a big game in this one?
Well, I would say the defensive front, and a little teaser. If you're listening to this, it's on Dawgs 24/7 right now. We have some expert bold predictions from the Dawgs 24/7 team about this game. And to me, one of the big questions is what kind of pressure the defensive front is going to be able to create. As we know, last week, retroactively, Raylan Wilson was the only one credited with the sack. He was living in the backfield last week with a few tackles for loss, was credited for the only sack on the team up to this point. And I'm curious to see how much that defensive front, that those defensive linemen of the names and faces that we've been talking about for years, but we just haven't seen a whole lot of, who is able to create some chaos in the backfield. Like, I feel like we, back in 21, 22, we talked about chaos way more than we talk about now, I think, or havoc, I guess it was, the havoc plays. I just felt like we talked about it a lot more then. I think that Jalen Walker was a great contributor to the havoc plays that happened last season, and he's no longer there. So who's going to step up in that defensive front, really along the defensive line, who ends up being those havoc creators? And I think that you see some guys step up this week and hope that everybody's prepared for the following week when you're going to go into a really, really tough environment.
I shout out a couple position groups that I'll be watching closely on Saturday. One, going back to outside linebacker, I want to see if someone really emerges. Quintavious Johnson, I think he's going to continue to be your starter. But to see if Elo Mendoza gets out there and makes plays, we saw him a little bit last week. Chris Jones, maybe seeing Gabe Harris stand up a little bit and play that jack position. I want to see what those guys can do, especially ahead of that trip to Knoxville, playing Tennessee in week 3. And then, going back to the running back room, I kind of want to see somebody not named Nate Frazier or Dwight Phillips Jr. make some plays. Now, I thought that Chauncey Bowens Jr. looked pretty good in that game against Marshall. Saw a little bit of Bo Walker. I think I'd like to see a little bit more. Hopefully Roderick Robinson's back out there. We saw a little bit of Josh McCray toward the end of that game. I want to see if maybe some of these other backs emerge, because I like the room's potential in the whole. But I think coming out of week 1, you could safely feel good about Nate Frazier. And I think it's trending to where you can feel safe, feel pretty good about Dwight Phillips Jr. But Georgia's going to need some of those other guys to live up to that potential and go out there and make some plays.
One thing I will also add, not necessarily a position group specific, but I would like to see Georgia get some explosive plays in both the passing game and the running game. And I know Zachariah Branch had the 47-yarder, but I don't think that's the type of play that's going to be replicable often in SEC play. That was really a check down, pick up a first down type of play. It was very well blocked, so don't get me wrong, but I don't think that many SEC teams are just going to get overpowered like that on a check down and screenplay like that. But I think you want to see some explosives in the passing game. I know that they took a couple shots to Talon Taylor, Noah Thomas. I think you'd like to see them connect on one of those shots in this game. And then I know we saw Dwight Phillips hit the 14-yarder. I think he hit another one that went close to 20 or something along those lines. A couple others that went close to 20. Like, we've seen him flirting around that. It's been a while, I feel like, since we've seen a Georgia running back just house call one from, 50, 60 yards out. And I think that really all three of the running backs you mentioned, Dwight Phillips, Nate Frazier, and Chauncey Bowens, have that speed. I think it might surprise people at times that Chauncey Bowens has that speed, but he really does. But I want to see either Nate Frazier or Dwight Phillips bust one of those in this game, just because it changes the threat level of the Georgia offense, I think, going into SEC play, if everyone knows that you have a home run hitter at running back.
Totally agree. And a different category that I want to throw out kind of goes back to our Austin Peay MTSU conversation. I want to see Georgia be more successful on third down. I honestly, Ben, I don't know if you had this on Saturday in that Marshall game. I didn't realize Georgia was only 6 of 16. And part of that's probably because they had success on fourth down, but I don't think they converted on third down nearly as much as they were planning.
I think there were a few factors in that. Clearly not as efficient as they would have liked to have been on third down, but I also think there were certain spots where they knew they were going to be going for it on fourth down if they picked up a few yards, and I think Gunner took some layups on third down short of the sticks that set them up for fourth down situations. They also had the one inside run to Cash Jones on third down that a lot of people will complain about being ill-advised, but I also think last season Georgia became so predictable when Cash Jones was on the field on third down. You knew that Cash Jones was not touching the ball. I think that anybody that's really in-depth watching Georgia film, like all of Georgia's opponents will probably know that Cash Jones isn't going to be in for many meaningful snaps on third down in running situations. But you've got to put it on tape from time to time to at least give people the thought that it could be something that's happening. So I'm not saying Georgia just threw one away there on third down, but I think you can live with it when you pick up the fourth down conversion. And I think you throw something on film on third down that at least makes people think about it in the future, because last year at the end of the season when 32 was on the field, it was a pass play.
Now, remind me, because I swear I seem to remember there was a play in the Sugar Bowl. Do you remember that, Ben, where they wound up running him? Because it was like before we both looked at each other like, well, I guess they're throwing here. And then they handed it to Cash Jones.
And I think, look, if it's unsuccessful, everyone's going to be critical of it. I get it. I'm not telling folks not to be critical of it when it's unsuccessful. But if you're not doing that, the predictability behind your play calling with that specific personnel grouping can end up costing you just the same. So if it ends up not working, it's the wrong decision. But if it works, then you were getting creative in a way with your personnel groupings. And I think that you have to make decisions like that during the course of a game. And sometimes it's going to be right, sometimes it's not.
To me, that kind of goes back to the process versus results that Kirby started the week talking about it. Ben, I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head right there.
Yeah, I'm a proud pupil.
Yeah, something like that. All right, so we all understand this matchup. I mean, Georgia's would be a heavy favorite. There's no line on this game that I can find because this is Georgia playing an FCS team. And with that, we expect to see some younger guys, some new faces, some guys that maybe we wouldn't necessarily see once Georgia gets in SEC play. So on that point, Ben, I want you to give me a guy on offense and a guy on defense that kind of fits that mold that you are really interested in seeing on Saturday. This doesn't necessarily mean you're predicting they're going to do something big, but it's guys that you would like to see out there that maybe we could learn a little bit more about.
It's a great question because we saw so many last week. It's interesting because we saw him on the first snap of the game, but he ended up not being targeted. But Ethan Barbour is someone, if he is playing snap one of the season, and that is a real thing that could be happening more often during the course of the season, his ball skills, we said this during his recruitment, like his ball skills are right up there with, I think, Talon Taylor and Thomas Blackshear is probably the best hands and ball skills in the class from a pass catching standpoint. If he's going to be on the field early and often, I would love to see Ethan Barbour get involved in the passing game because I think he was used more in that H-back type of role, like that when they ran 12 personnel. And I think it's just because he's so disciplined and so competitive, he's going to get on the field early. But I think you want to try and utilize him in the passing game as well if you can, just to see what he can contribute. So one that is less surprising of a pick, I guess, now that he has started week one. On the defensive side, I saw him make a play in the fourth quarter against Marshall. it's hard to know with how much Georgia has to rotate its linebackers with Chris Cole and Justin Williams and CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson. Like, everyone deserves so many snaps. But if Georgia builds up the lead that it can, and the defense appears to be firing on all cylinders, where if you insert a guy here or there, you can get a guy like Zayden Walker more involved with some first team or second team defensive guys, maybe even get him sprinkled in earlier in the game than he did. Look, if we're talking who's the next up when it comes to after, Chris Cole is very likely a 3-year NFL type of guy. Justin Williams very, very likely is a 3-year NFL type of guy. So what does that mean? These young guys, these freshmen are going to have to be ready sometime early next year in a real way. And if you can get them contributing in some of these types of games, I think getting Zayden Walker on the field to see, is he the next up from a Butkus Award standpoint at Georgia linebacker? These types of opportunities will tell a lot.
The guys I'll go with, it was on offense, a guy you mentioned earlier. Talon Taylor was targeted during that game, but he did not have a reception against Marshall. So I'd like to see him get the ball and see if he can do something with it. On defense, a guy that I felt like kind of got in the defensive line rotation a little earlier than I expected, J.J. Hanney. I want to see a guy that, I mean, frankly, Ben, I went into this year thinking, okay, this first year you might as well write it off. He's a developmental guy. And I think he proved a lot of people wrong. I think he had a really good summer and fall camp, and I think that he earned a blue cap, blue guardian cap with how he practiced and that fire, passion, and energy. So I'll be interested to see if he's able to get out there and make some plays. And kind of a bonus one, I think it kind of fits in very similarly to your Zayden Walker pick, Dominic Kelly. I thought he made another good play when he was in the Marshall game. You go back to G-Day, this is a guy that, he was supposed to be by, April of this year. He was supposed to still be a junior in high school, and he makes a pick at G-Day, and I thought he made another good play in the game against Marshall. So I think he's a guy that, there's a lot of more experienced guys in front of him, but I continue to be impressed by Dominic Kelly, and I think he has a chance, next year to factor in depending on, what Georgia brings back at the position.
I know we were both really impressed by him when he was on the show on signing day, and he just has a way about him that surprises you that he's a year behind a lot of these guys. To your point, makes play on G-Day, really nice pass breakup in that game. If you pause the game footage of it, when he makes that play in the background, you can see Ellis Robinson having a conversation with someone, and he makes like a facial expression of sorts. And in retrospect, they played high school ball together for a little bit at IMG Academy. I wish I would have thought of this when we got Ellis Robinson earlier this week, because I'm sure he's got some interesting insights on the overall progression of Dominic Kelly through the years.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, come back and talk specifically about this matchup, a couple injury updates, what we're watching for, how we think this thing will play out, and we will also give some score projections. All right, turning our attention to the matchup on Saturday, I want to start with a couple injury updates. Now, as we're recording this, just based on the information I've gotten, I don't expect to see Juan Gaston and Ernest Green in this game, and I think it makes a ton of sense given the opponent, given what awaits Georgia in Week 3 at Tennessee. I'm not necessarily concerned about either of them yet. We'll have to see how they go about next week, but I don't think we'll see them. Good news, I think Dalen Everett will be available. He was dealing with an ankle injury last week. And then also Roderick Robinson would be good. Get him back. Kirby told us on Monday that if they had to have played Roderick Robinson, he could have gone, but they decided not to push the issue as he works through a hamstring injury. And then really the injury to know on Austin Peay side is Chris Parson, who I talked about earlier. Very impressive against MTSU, but he left that game early. Shout out Mark Weiser at the Athens Banner Herald. Got this quote from Jeff Ferris, who is Austin Peay's coach. This was from Jeff's radio show. Chris is good. Chris had a great week of practice. He's going to play, and he's going to play well. So that is definitely going to help Austin Peay as they try to go out there and they try to make some plays in Sanford Stadium. All right, Ben, what do you think we're going to see on Saturday? How do you think this one's going to play out? And give me a score prediction.
I think it's going to look a heck of a lot like the first one did. I think you will see Georgia control the tempo offensively. It does intrigue me with how much success Austin Peay had stopping Middle Tennessee State's ground game. Is it one of those weird things where this is a team that's going to win its own conference and it has a really swarming run defense? When you have those types of teams, they can be tough to deal with, even if you have more talent than them, because if they're swarming to the football and they're getting guys on the ground, sometimes it'll stall drives out that wouldn't ordinarily happen, because I think that a lot of drives extend because teams aren't very good at tackling college football. And so I don't know about that. I don't know enough about Austin Peay to know that. My assumption is Georgia's talent level will take over. Georgia will be in full control offensively. You know, everyone complained all offseason about Georgia not starting fast enough last season, and then they scored touchdowns on 3 of the first 4 possessions of the season, and then everyone's complaining that the second quarters aren't productive enough. So I'm sure that people will find something that is not fully adequate to their standards when it comes to the Austin Peay game. I'm predicting Georgia 44, Austin Peay 6. I think it's going to look just about the exact same as the Marshall game did. I'm going to give them a little bit more credit for forcing 2 field goals in a spot where Georgia scored a touchdown in the last one. So 44 instead of 45. But I do think the Georgia defense showed me something last week, and I expect them to keep the opponent out of the end zone this week after letting one in last week.
I'm going to say that Georgia, like Ben just said, keeps the opponent out of the end zone. And I'm going to say they keep them from scoring. I think Georgia posts its first shutout of the season. Again, I like what I saw from Austin Peay, knowing what level they're playing in the competition. But, I mean, this is just one of those one-sided games. I've got Georgia 42-0. I think it's going to be a productive game. I think it's going to be a game where, you know, a lot of the time when you see Georgia in these games, Kirby Smart's not one to run the score up. I think that there's a respect to the teams that are at the FCS or even some of the group of 5. You know, they're not going to really rub it in. So I got Georgia 42-0. I think that, Georgia will pass essentially all the tests it can before the big test, which is week 3 at Tennessee.
A reminder on a stat from last week, Kirby Smart 0-14 now in games where Georgia is favored, 0-4 against the spread, I should say, in games where Georgia is favored by 38-plus points, not listed in most places. If it was listed, it would be more than 38-plus points. All that to say, like Jordan said, Georgia's more one to throw out looks, get freshmen involved, make some mistakes there in the fourth quarter, not run things up. So I'm hesitant to say that I think Georgia's going to put up 50, but I think Georgia offensively very easily could score 50-plus, 60-plus against this Austin Peay team.
Kirby talked earlier this week about not really being all that upset if they lost a shutout, if they got younger guys involved. And, well, my prediction says, well, maybe they'll do both.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, Ben, any thoughts on what's coming up on week 2? Any games that interest you in particular as we get ready for another week of games?
Somewhat vanilla of a slate this week. Oklahoma, Michigan is going to catch a lot of people's attention because it's a Big Ten SEC matchup. It's 2 traditional programs. It's 2 schools that have pretty fascinating quarterback situations going on right now. There's a chance John Mateer is the best quarterback in college football. There's a chance that Bryce Underwood is the future best quarterback in college football. I think that Michigan faithful believe that Bryce Underwood has arrived more than I believe that Bryce Underwood has arrived. So I tend to favor Oklahoma at home with the guy that I believe is the best quarterback in college football right now. But that one will be interesting. It's one that I'm hoping that we're able to catch some of the end of. I hope you're not keeping me working too late there in the press box on Saturday night so that I can maybe catch a glimpse of that second half there.
Fingers crossed there. That's the biggest game on the slate this week. The one I'll shout out to, though, South Florida and Florida. I think Florida feels pretty good about how it opened the season against Long Island. But, South Florida, I did not see that coming, what they did in that win against Boise. So Florida better show up. I know that you and Kip are big Florida fans this season, but that South Florida team, man, Bryce Brown, I'll be interested to keep up with that game. I think it has a chance to be a good one.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, Ben, before we get out of here, we will be at a UGA Athletic Association board meeting on Friday afternoon. Anything in particular you're wanting to hear or interested to see what Josh Brooks and Jerry Moorhead have to say coming out of that?
What are the things that are on your agenda as potential items on the slate?
I think the biggest thing, and it's really not so much the board meeting, but we usually get a chance to talk to Josh and Jerry after the meeting. And the things I'm interested in, this will be the first time we've talked to them since the SEC officially moved to 9 conference games. So hearing what they think about that, but also what that means for some of the games that got scheduled. If I'm not mistaken, right now, Georgia has 4 non-conference games scheduled for 2026. So trying to get some insight on that. I don't know exactly how much, Josh will be willing to talk about what that looks like. So that's probably the biggest thing for me. There's probably some other NIL conversations, collectives, the talk right now about maybe taking another step closer to just one transfer portal. The biggest thing for me right now is kind of getting their reaction on the 9-game conference schedule and the ramifications for Georgia's future schedules.
You bring up a good point about the future home and homes. I wrote about it a few weeks ago at Dawgs 24/7 that I have been told that the FSU Georgia home and home is on eggshells at this point in time, which is interesting to me because that's not even one of the home and homes that's taking place during the season where Georgia already has 4 out of conference opponents. So it calls into question Ohio State, Clemson, Louisville, those future matchups too. I know those are conversations that have been happening behind closed doors within the athletic department. I don't know whether or not they've reached a conclusion or not, but that is something that would be interesting to know coming out of that because I know it's the problem with future scheduling is we know that the landscape right now isn't what it's going to look like in 2030. We know that these ACC teams have buyout clauses that reduce in cost all the way up till 2030 and that some of these teams are actively working their way out of that conference. And so that's going, I don't know that Florida State's going to be an SEC team. I don't know that Clemson's going to be an SEC team. I don't know that Louisville might be a team that could be in consideration to be an SEC team. But we don't know. Could they be on Georgia's regular conference scheduling? So does it even make sense for them to be on future schedules, especially when you have out-of-conference clutter, when you're moving to 9 conference games? It all is confusing, and it makes it even clearer that future out-of-conference scheduling is one of the stupidest things in sports. You would think it would be much simpler than that. But what do I know, Jordan? What do I know?
Well, if those teams were to join the SEC, the SEC, Georgia should keep them on their schedule and just do what the ACC has done. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there's one of these games this weekend. I think Virginia NC State does not count toward ACC standings. You play an ACC matchup, but it's a non-conference game. Now, doesn't that sound like a winner right there, Ben?
I would not be opposed to that whatsoever. And I also, as I said earlier, would not be opposed to playing as many in-conference games as possible. Look, Austin Peay week in week 2, when there's a bunch of SEC games coming up, is not the week for you and I to be solving college football, but we can certainly have an episode where we try and solve college football scheduling and conference alignment if we need to.
Sounds like week 4 during the bye week. I think that would be the perfect time.
We'll see what Josh Brooks and company have to say coming out of tomorrow, and maybe that'll shed some light in terms of what we even need to approach as topics.
All right, we're going to end the episode right there. I appreciate Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to this after the fact. Be sure to go subscribe to Dawgs247.com. Again, great time to join the Junkyard. We are in the thick of football season. Men's basketball starting up here pretty soon as far as practices, and that season will get started in November. Georgia baseball getting ready for another big season. Olivia Sayer will have you covered there. A lot of great content. We hope you guys will join us over on the Junkyard. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate, review. That helps us out so much. Subscribe to our YouTube, Dawgs247. Subscribe to our TikTok. A lot of good content there. So we'll end the episode right there. For Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.